The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. A subliminal message is one sent and received below the threshold of consciousness. Anthony Greenwald studies these messages, and two of his most recent projects have examined unconscious prejudice against women and self-help tapes that claim subliminal audio messages can actually change behavior. Greenwald is a professor of psychology at the University of Washington. And welcome to Upon Reflection.
Hello.
Let's start by defining some terms of what is the unconscious? What do we know about it?
The unconscious is something that psychologists disagree on the meaning, but more or less it means what we're not aware of. And we know that the mind does a lot that is outside of attention or awareness, so unconscious is, Freud called it the 90% or so of the iceberg that was submerged, and that may not be a bad estimate of the percentage of how much is done without our being aware of it.
So you have this idea that the unconscious is this kind of murky area that it's sort of passive in a way as far as we're concerned. It's just sitting there taking things in or rejecting them, as the case may be?
It's sitting there doing a lot of work, but a lot of simple work. For example, right now, I don't expect to be run over by an automobile coming from that direction right now. But if something started coming rapidly at me from that direction, even though I wasn't attending to it consciously, I would be processing it unconsciously. My attention would be drawn over there, and that's working for me. That's simple work, scanning the environment. It's like a distant early warning system.
What percentage, is there a way to break down at any given moment when our mind is at work, what percentage is conscious and what percentage is not?
That would just be guesswork. We do not really have techniques that sort of budget mental activity to the conscious and unconscious domains. But it's an interesting question just in terms of a sort of ballpark answer. And a lot of psychologists believe nowadays that the great majority of information processing the stimuli from the environment, sounds, sights, everything, is done unconsciously. And the conscious is the top level, which is only brought into play for the really important things that require action at the moment.
As you think of how busy our environment is, how many messages there are, how much is going on, and we really can only pay attention. I mean, common sense would tell you that you can only really pay attention and be conscious of a very small fraction of what's actually happening.
Right. Well, if we can use an analogy, coming over the television airwaves or the cable wire or whatever are many stations, many sources of information. We focus on one at a time because the tuner of our TV set will only pick up one at a time. But the way our mind functions was as if we were monitoring all of them. So it might be as if we were looking at a TV screen that had all the channels on it simultaneously in separate pieces of the screen, separate channels, and whatever drew our attention, we could sort of blow up and command the whole screen and focus on it, and that would be the conscious attention.
Now, in advertising, these subliminal messages have been used deliberately, and we have a number of examples that we're going to take a look at now, where some message is being sent, we may not even know it was there, because a lot of these images that we're going to look at have been seen quite often, and here we have Pepsi.
Okay, yeah, we've got a series of images here, and I picked them out to illustrate a number of points. This one is, well, when we're talking about advertising, what we mean by subliminal means various things, and this most people mean by subliminal something that is just very briefly on or very dim. The examples we're going to be looking at are ones that we can see clearly, and they're subliminal in another sense, which is that they're not at the focus of our attention, so they might be processed unconsciously. Now, this particular example comes from can design that Pepsi used a few years ago, and I don't know how easy it is to see on the screen, but you can see that when these cans are rotated properly and stacked in a certain way, one can see the letters SEX in the two cans on the right side.
That's a big subliminal message, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sex shows up a lot.
Well, I don't think that it actually appears that often, and when it does, and in this way, it becomes, I think this appeared in Time magazine or somewhere. I mean, it's not that no one knows about it. It sort of creates a big
Maybe it's just
stir.
the catchiest.
And I don't think that this kind of use of subliminals, namely the word sex appearing in advertising, is at all very frequent. But I picked this one as a sort of cute illustration, and who knows what effect it has.
Is that supposed to make us buy that product? Is that
Well, there's a theory that has not been confirmed by research that it could have some effect. I'd have to say, most honestly, we really don't know. I'm being cautious. Now, here we have another case. Unlike the Pepsi cans that we were looking at before, and we could really see the letters SEX, this one is one for which people may disagree as to whether the letters are there. But if you look at the red ribbons on the tree, they and their surround could look like the script SEX. Now, this makes it more obvious, but we'll have to say that there's been airbrushed onto this slide white dashes that outline the letters so viewers can see where they are. And those white dashes weren't in the bigger one
a
that
not
we saw
so subliminal
before.
underlining of the message?
So I started with this because I think it's the popular view of what subliminal advertising is. The word sex on Ritz crackers or in ice cubes or whatever.
Now, this is a popular film poster.
This is something else. This different type of thing. Here's a sort of very nice graphic work, which is a poster for the movie Silence of the Lambs, and you see that bee in the lower left. Now, from that, it's worked into the model's mouth, so it just looks like a very interesting graphic thing. But when we go close up in that, we see something else. And what we'll see is something that would be visible to someone who is looking at this poster and looking at it closely, but you'd really have to focus on it. Now, here we're close up on the bee, and on the back of the bee is something that is very clearly a skull. There's no doubt about that. And what viewers may not be able to see is that this skull is actually composed of 3 or 4 human figures that appear to be nude. Can you see that, Marcia? No, it may not come across that well.
I never even noticed the skull when I
well,
saw
the
poster.
The eyes in this skull are backs of heads, and the bones that look like they're coming down from those eyes are the torsos.
This is like a Rorschach
Right,
test.
exactly. I think I'm not making this up. I think this is a very nice piece of graphics. I regard this more as a work of art than something that has psychological stature. I think you have to be cued in on this and be looking at it and attending it to pick up the fact that it is a skull and there are humans there. And I doubt that it has any great impact unless you actually notice that. But it's another example of what's sometimes meant by subliminal. Mm-hmm. Now, this is sort of continuing the buried head theme in the image. This is a jewelry advertisement, and we're looking at it from in a full shot now. And in the sort of top center, there's one piece of jewelry that's a ring that appears. This was a cover of a catalog. And if we take what you're going to see next is a close-up of that with an inset that wasn't actually in the ad. But the inset is there so that you'll see that that small piece of jewelry that was near the top center actually has been airbrushed and doctored by the artist to contain what looks like a sort of vampire's head with, well, just like the one next to it.
Let me ask you, now here is this picture with daisies, and it's very, springy and all. Why would they do that? What is the purpose of putting that message in what seems to be a very contradictory context?
It's conceivable that this image, as part of that larger cover shot, had some subtle value of triggering an association. And why associate jewelry with this evil? Well, maybe the vampire is regarded as seductive in me, so maybe it's an association
it's sexy again.
with seductiveness. But this, again, I put more in the category of art than psychology. It's sort of interesting to look at as an example more of what the popular conception is of subliminal than what we actually know to work. Now, here's another one that even more directly than the last one raises the question of why is this here? This is an ad for clothing, and from this full view, you may be able to see in the tree at the back of one of the models something that looks like two eyes and a nose, sort of a head, maybe an animal head. If we look at that closer, we see that that actually looks like a wolf's head there. And one might say, well, maybe the tree trunk just happened to look like that. But almost certainly this is absolutely no accident. I mean, it isn't a natural shape. The people who do this kind of commercial work are very conscious of all the details. So this was, I'm virtually positive, put there deliberately. So back to your question, why? Why would this be put there deliberately? And my answer is, I haven't the faintest clue. Why? Because I don't think this is an image or produces any associations that could possibly sell those genes. Maybe other people have theories about it, but those theories haven't been confirmed. Now, here we have something else that, and this is the only shot of this one that we're going to see. This is, I think it's a clothing ad. And you'll notice in the background is this very vague shape that we could probably guess is a sort of an evil-looking head. Might be an animal, might be a skull or something like that. It's sinister, and the way the whole ad is photographed with this male model half in the dark suggests darkness and sinister. It's actually on his left side, the sinistral side. Oh, we do have a close-up of it.
Looks like a bear to me.
Yeah, it looks like some sort of animal and a menacing animal. So I think, now here's one where I think that something actually is going on that may work towards selling the product. I think this advertiser was deliberately trying to associate this male power sinister idea, and so this is power clothing, and that sort of unattended message may have captured that.
We're looking now at is it a perfume ad?
This
Makeup?
is a perfume ad, and again, this is, to me, a very interesting one, because now, just like the last ad, the clothing ad, this one I think gets into a domain where those things that are off in the periphery may actually be having some effect on the person, because the association they trigger can help to sell the product. Now, you certainly can't from this distance tell what's there, but if you look at a close-up like this, you see that on the walls of the buildings in the background, and you really have to look close to see these, are a few words. One of them is fresh. And the other one I think that we have is the word soft, yes, in that one, in blue script in the lower part of it. And in this particular image, there were several other words buried on different buildings. These are, you can see these if you look all over the surface of this ad. They're in plain sight, but the typical person who's going by them rapidly and looking through a magazine would not dwell on them. And nevertheless, the eyes would pass over them, and without, at the periphery, like these channels we're not attending, and they could register their association value, and in this case, the association, soft and fresh and a few other things, are probably effective in capturing an image about the perfume. Here's our last image.
A controversial character in and of his own self.
Yeah, actually, people might think we're looking at this for this cool camel character who's been regarded as a rather objectionable and perhaps phallic image. And I won't get into that aspect of it because there's some other interesting things going on in this ad at the periphery of our attention. I mean, our attention is sort of focused on that character, but look what's happening off on the side of the things we're not paying much attention to.
It's like war is being waged in the Persian Gulf.
Well, he's wearing the Tom Cruise sunglasses from Top Gun, and we have a plane taking off from the carrier deck.
And the ubiquitous woman leaning in one side of the picture.
So this is capturing the idea of the hero of that movie, Top Gun. And it's not at all blatant. It's very subtle, but I think it's the kind of thing that can register outside of attention.
It's interesting looking at that last one, the camel. I never would have noticed any. It just goes right by. Tell me where those slides came from.
Very glad to have been able to get these from Stacy Green, who is a collector of graphic subliminal materials like this, who lives in the Seattle area and lectures in this area. And what he's done, he has a much larger collection, and it's really a very nice collection, which he was very kind as to let me pull out just those few illustrations that we looked at.
Now, you know, clearly the people are toying around with these messages, but you did a study on the effectiveness of one attempt to use subliminal messages, some self-help tapes. And what did they claim they could do subliminally?
Well, as viewers may be aware, there are a great many claims made for what can be done with subliminal self-help tapes. I happen to study tapes that were designed to achieve two of the most common and relatively mundane claims of boosting self-esteem and increasing memory, but some of these go on to cure disease and develop bust size and lose weight, stop smoking. You name it, there's a subliminal self-help
This is a big
tape
business.
It is a big business, and it was one that psychologists had not attended to, mostly because psychologists gave it no credit whatsoever, believed that these things couldn't possibly be effective, and it turned out there was no good research on it. So 4 or 5 years ago, together with Eric Spangenberg, who's a doctoral student in marketing at the university here, we investigated some of these tapes, getting them from several manufacturers, having advertising for people who were interested in boosting self-esteem or memory, and getting them to agree to be in our study. We'd provide them the tapes, and all they needed to do was come in at the beginning of the study and then come back a month later, which was about the amount of time the manufacturers stated would be sufficient to achieve these effects. And we would measure their self-esteem at the beginning and the end, their memory at the beginning and the end. And we did that, and we found the bottom line of the study that there was absolutely no effect of the subliminal messages on these tapes. We used what's called a double-blind study, in which the subjects didn't know exactly what they were getting, and we didn't know exactly what we were giving them, but they all had a tape with a label on them. And it turned out that they showed some improvements that were related to the label on the tape and some general improvements from participating in the study, but nothing associated with the subliminal content.
Now, see, that's interesting because people would look at these labels. It's like a placebo effect.
Yeah.
This tape is supposed to make my memory better, and by gosh, you know, the memory was better. Well, then can't the people who make those tapes say, hey, if people think their memories are better, they work?
The people who manufacture these tapes are not at all pleased about the idea that if these tapes have any effect, it's a placebo effect, because then they're in the same category of our stereotype of the snake oil seller, of selling a bottle of something that is described as medicine but has no actual effect. But the whole context of taking something from a trusted authority that is claimed to have a certain effect and using it can have some psychological effect, and those placebo effects are very interesting. I'm now directing my research much more towards them because I and many others who've done research with the double-blind design have established very clearly that the subliminal messages on these tapes have no effect, but the placebo effect is something else that we'd like to understand.
I read a quote from a physician who said that the placebo effect may be one of the most powerful medicines we have, that if people really believe that these things are going to happen, it's much more likely that they will happen. It won't guarantee that they happen.
That's true, and I've heard claims that 30% of all therapeutic effects might be described as placebo effects. And more interestingly, when you take actually a drug such as a painkiller, maybe part of the effect is due to the drug itself, but then there's another part of the effect that's sort of a placebo effect added on top of what the drug might do all by itself.
In reading about the study, I never did know what the message was supposed to be that was in these tapes. I mean, it sounds like some of the tapes were ocean waves or wind noises or whatever. Is buried in there, like the pictures that we saw, somebody whispering, "Your memory will improve"?
That and other very similarly simple assertions, but not whispering so you could hear it. In fact, excuse me, there's no way to boost the volume on these tapes and actually hear any of these messages. So it's as if a message has been recorded on the tape, but at such a low level that it can't possibly be heard by anyone who's listening for it. And for all practical purposes, it's not there.
Now, you're doing some other work as well that has to do with subliminal messages, but this has to do with discrimination. Tell me a bit about that study.
Yes, recently, and this is part of a general interest in the way unconscious processes operate, social psychologists and cognitive psychologists nowadays are coming to believe more and more that prejudice and discrimination are much more prevalent in our society than we imagine. Why? Because many people, like me, for example, who believe themselves not to be prejudiced and not to stereotype, not to discriminate, nevertheless are sort of victims of the socialization process which has established at an unconscious level tendencies to perceive things in stereotyped ways and tendencies to discriminate against certain categories of people without really being aware of being that we're discriminating. Now, what we did in the way of a study was just a very simple way of beginning to get at this idea, but showing how it might operate unconsciously. And what we did was to give people lists of names, and ask them to identify which names were famous. And half the names were of famous people, and half the names were of ones that we had made up non-famous. And what we found, I won't go into some of the complexities of the design, but very simply what we found is that when names were not famous, a male name was much more likely to be mistakenly judged as famous.
So to get boosted up.
Than a female name. Now, we interpret this as reflecting a stereotype that associates maleness with achievement in our society. And that association exists. If you look through Who's Who, if you look through the New York Times and count the number of male and female names that appear, there are many more male names. Yet, when we take a situation in which we've objectively equated fame by using non-famous names, people are likely to apply this stereotype unconsciously, we're really convinced, and be likely to make the mistake of judging a name to be famous more if it's male than female.
Having found that out from that study, what other kinds of studies does that then suggest? How can that be followed up, be amplified, be looked at in different ways?
Well, we like this study because it provides us sort of a laboratory model of stereotyping and discrimination. So what we want to do next with this, and we've already started with it, and I wish I could tell you that the results are in and we know what they are, is to find how we can use this laboratory situation to undo the effect. What can we do to make people not make, in this particular case, the mistake of judging male names to be famous at a higher than appropriate rate? Of course, we could simply tell them, hey, please don't judge the male names as famous and judge the female names as famous.
I think it's going to be more complicated than that.
That's not the kind of thing we're looking at. Actually, that would work, but we're looking for things that could be generalized into strategies for affirmative action or non-discrimination in social settings.
Now, when you say that these things don't work, do you know if it's because a message has been sent and it's received in the subconscious and just it's like the subconscious says, who cares? Or it's just not received there at all? Can you tell that there's a difference?
Well, if we go back to the subliminal tapes, where the theory underlying the product that the manufacturers will give you is that, in fact, this message is received and resides and in the unconscious and then operates from that without your being aware of it. I don't believe that at all, and I and a number of others have been doing research to try to figure out just what level of complexity of analysis unconscious cognitive processes are capable of. Now, that was a real mouthful, but basically
what does it mean?
What we are looking for to see is how smart the unconscious processes are. And in experiment after experiment, we find that unconscious processes are not very smart. They can't process a whole sentence. They can't even put two words together and find something that depends on this conjunction of two words rather than just one word alone.
I think I read my first book on this subject about 20 years ago, a book called Subliminal Seduction. And there was a kind of hysteria about subliminal messages that, you know, we're all going to end up being robots because in the theater, you know, sort of the folk legend was that they'd flash, eat popcorn, and you'd march out to the lobby and buy popcorn. I mean, does your study indicate that we really don't have to worry about that quite so much, that these messages aren't that powerful?
By and large, the research produces a reassuring message because the popular lay conception of what can be done and the dangerous things that can be achieved through and the unwanted effects that could be achieved subliminally, those have not at all been verified in research. But I don't want to be entirely reassuring because, like the examples of the advertising we were looking at before, some of those depend on effects that can really occur, and these are these very subtle things that involve, like the words off on the buildings in the perfume ad, or the background images in that cigarette ad. Now, that's subliminal in a sense.
And as we said at the very beginning, this is a part of our mind that's still very new, and we have a lot more to learn. I want to thank you for being a guest on Upon Reflection. Fascinating subject, Professor Anthony Greenwald.
Thank you.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.